Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we have a special 4-part series on different ways to make objects float. So let's jump in and see what they are. Okay, so how to make an object float on a liquid. So there's actually a few different ways to do this, and in this first video I want to show you what the easiest and fastest way to do it is. It's through a cloner object, and it is the fastest and easiest, but it also has a couple drawbacks. So let me show you how I built this. So let's turn off the final here, which is what we're going to end up creating. And what I've done is I've already taken the time to prep the ocean here, what we'll call an ocean. And I'm using something called Hot4D. I'll link to it down in the comments. It's super awesome. It's a free plugin. I highly recommend that you donate to the website because the guy or girl who makes this can definitely be charging money for it, and props to them for making it. So yeah, check it out. It's really cool. It makes oceans very simply. Deforms mesh. So I've already taken the time to prep that. We have our ocean moving. And then the object that we actually want to float on it. So the object that we want to float right here is a little flamingo inflatable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a MoGraph cloner object. And let's take that cloner object and let's drop the flamingo underneath so then it actually clones it. And then we want to set this to object. So when we set this to object, let's drag in our water to be that object because we actually want it to go onto the water itself, on the surface of that object. So in this situation, it's actually so straightforward that there's not much more to this tutorial. If I come in here and I hit play, we're done. I mean, this is it. They're floating. Which is amazing because it just so happens that these settings pretty much all work. You don't have to change the up vector because you always want it to be moving with the mesh. And the distribution is going to be surface. And let's just put it to render instance so it maybe plays a little faster here. That's pretty much it. You know, where the drawbacks come in is if I want a lot of these, they're going to start intersecting. And there's really not a good way to fix that. You could set them all to the vertices, and then that would probably fix it, but you're still going to have limitations in like if you want them randomized and whatnot. It's also nice because if you just want one of these objects, you can just put one, and then if you switch your seed, it'll go through every single vertex in the object. And I would also say that if you want to control where this is, you can check out my other video about MoGraph selection, and then you can place it anywhere you want to. I'll link to it probably somewhere up here. Okay, and then lastly, I want to mention that this can be used really with anything. It doesn't have to be this Hot4D ocean plugin. I mean, if you just have a deforming mesh, it's going to connect to it. So to demonstrate, let's go to MoGraph effector and let's do, it's not an effector, it's not a deformer. And let's do a formula effector. Where is it? There it is, formula effector. All right, let's put that underneath. Let's turn this. You're gonna see it's gonna ride the waves, you know, as it comes through, which is pretty cool. You know, it doesn't have to be, it can be whatever you need it to be. So that's it, quick and simple. And on the next video, I'm going to show you a way to do it that takes a little bit longer setup, but gives you a little bit more control. So I will see you on the next one. Okay, so part 2 of how to make an object float on top of water. So for this technique, we're going to use something that gives us a little bit more control of where objects are placed, but also requires a bit more setup. So in this part, we're going to take a look at constraining this object, constraining the float to the water with the constraint tag. So let's go ahead and select our float, and let's go to tags, character tags, and let's select constraint. Now I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the constraint tag, but what you should know is that it does what it says. It constrains various objects, meshes, points, polygons, you name it. It constrains those to different, to other things. So for our situation, we want to take an object or an axis and constrain it to the surface of this water. So to do that, we need to be under clamp. Okay, so just as before, we need to tell it to, what are we constraining it to? We're constraining it to a surface, and that surface is the water. So let's grab our water, and it's the same water as we had before. Let's drag it into our target, and instantly you'll see that we have this little red line. All that little red line is just telling us is that this is the distance from the surface to your object, okay? So let's go ahead and set that to 0 because we want it to actually be on the surface. And you can do that here, or you can go up if you want to, but you can't go down, which I think is a little strange. All right, so that's constrained. We know that we want it to be facing up in this situation, so y plus, because our y-axis is going this way. Mode, fixed position is fine. And this AS, I'm not sure what this stands for, but essentially it's rotation from what I can tell. From my test, Phong normal seems to be the way to go. Normal works, but Phong normal has less popping when it's moving across. So when we set this, you're going to see that the float is going to rotate based on the Phong normal. Well, it's not on a spot that really rotates much now. But yeah, so if I turn this to none, it's not going to rotate with it. It's just going up and down. But if I turn it to Phong normal, you'll see now it's rotating with it. So that's cool. That's what we need. Now this is great. You could do this 100 times for whatever you need to. I could also come in here and I can sync them in a little bit because it's based on the null. So that's great. You have more control. But where I think it really shines is it actually will move across this surface. So you'll see I can come here and I can move its position really any way, and it's going to deform along that surface, or it's going to move across that surface, I should say. So this is cool because now I can come up here to my null and I can set a position keyframe. And then let's go to the end and let's set another position keyframe. And then if we hit play, you'll see that as it moves, it's going to deform along that object. Now, if you're doing this and you're finding that you're getting popping, you just need to up the samples on your mesh. I did this a couple times and there was popping when it moved across. And as soon as I upped the samples on my mesh, it went away. So that's pretty much it. I would say this setup is good. There are other options here, but I found that if you lock the position, basically all that's going to do is not going to allow you to move. I don't know why you would want to do that, but if you just want an object to sit there, yeah, just don't move it. That's it for part 2, and I will see you in part 3. Okay, so part 3 of how to make an object float on water. All right, so for part 3, we are going to make it float on water through dynamics. And I've added a wall here just in case some of the floats decide to go their own way. So adding it with dynamics is probably maybe people's first thoughts of how you might do this. And it's a great way to do it, but it's expensive. It's very render intensive and it takes a long time to simulate. Having said that, you get great simulations, but you get a little less control. And sometimes you don't necessarily need those crazy simulations, and you might need more control. I find I prefer control over the simulations, and that's why I'm putting this 1/3, because I find that this technique is great, but a lot of times is a little bit of overkill. So let's do it. So same setup. I just have, like I said, a wall here. I have our water, and I also have our flamingo. So the first thing we're going to want to do is let's select our flamingo, and let's go to tags, simulation tags, rigid body. Now I'm assuming that all of you watching are somewhat familiar with dynamics, and if you're not, there's tons of information out there, and perhaps one day I will make a tutorial on it. So for our simulation tag, let's set this to be automatic shape is fine. And actually, I think all of this is fine. Like, I don't think we have to mess with any of this. So now let's also set our water to be a collider body. So let's go to tags, simulation tags, and collider body. Now under the collider body, this is a moving mesh. So let's switch the shape from automatic to moving mesh, because our water is actually moving. The shape is deforming. All right, let's hit play and see what happens. Okay, so right away you can see it takes a little bit longer, but it works. Whew, takes a while, yeah. And this is kind of what I was getting at. I mean, I have a brand new computer here, and it's chugging away pretty slow. So I think for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to just bump down the resolution of this water so we can actually see it. You can see that the mesh is actually deforming here, or moving along the surface, which is great. And it works. It's super simple. Again, the trade-off is it just takes time. After it passes through it once, it goes through. And then, on top of that, I can come in here and I could do more dynamic things. I can come in here and I could say, oh, let's put some wind in there. Grab a fan. Whereas with the other techniques, you might be able to set this up with dynamics with the other techniques, but it's still going to be easier to do it this way. So we'll just crank this up and we'll put this to 15 or something. And then now I'm just going to, whatever, let's put it up to 50 just so I can show you. So it's going to blow it really far. Oops, let's put a collider tag on the walls too. And we'll just set this to static mesh. So now when it bumps into it, it should hit the wall and come back like that. Cool. So that's one way. And then if you also, what's cool about this technique, if you need to do multiple ones, I've already set up a cloner object here. So let's take a cloner object. Let's turn off this flamingo, just a single. And let's go to our cloner object and let's select tag, simulation tag, and then let's put another rigid body on there. This time we want to set it to automatic mode dynamics, and let's set the individual elements to all. That's just going to say each individual element I want you to treat as a separate object. Let me show you what it looks like without. Let's do individual elements to off. You'll see what happens. Might be a little slow here. Whew, slow. All right, let's turn off our fan just to hopefully speed up the process. And then you'll see as they fall, it just is like 1 unit, which is not what you want. So let's go back. Let's set individual elements to all. And now when they fall, they're going to be treated. They're going to be treated as individuals. They're not going to, move as a unit. So that's it. From here, let me just cache this. I'm gonna do a cache on this, and I'll pause it. And when I come back, I'll show you what the final simulation looks like. Okay, so we're all cached up, and you'll see even with the cache, it's still having trouble playing this back. And again, I have a nice machine, so this is where you have trade-offs. And yeah, there's cool simulations, but it becomes rather time intensive. And I still have a low-res mesh here, and it's still having trouble playing this back, which is kind of crazy because it's not that complicated. So maybe it's time for a restart. All right, that's it. On to part 4, which is going to be doing this with X-Particles' new simulation techniques that they have with their dynamic particles. So we'll be taking a look at that on part 4. Okay, so part 4. Now in part 4, we're going to talk about how to make our objects float on top of water using X-Particles' new XP dynamics. So let's jump in and see what it's all about. Okay, I'm going to switch projects here. We're going to go, first I'm going to pause this. We're going to go over to a brand new project, and I'm going to show you how I set this up. So in the new version of X-Particles, they have XP dynamics, and you can do a lot of really cool, fun, and interesting things with it. So I thought, why not, let's explore it and see how well it does. Now this is going to be a brief overview of what it can actually do, but also it's also assuming that you know a little bit about X-Particles, or at least familiar with particle simulations in general. So let's jump in. So I have my flamingo, as we have before, and I also have a boundary object. Now this boundary object is going to be the container for our simulation. So let's go ahead and let's create an X-Particles system. And underneath the system, underneath our emitter, we're going to set this to box. And we want this box to be the same size as our boundary, so 400 by 400. So let's go to our emitter, object, box, and let's go 400 by 400. And let's just set this to 50. Okay, so now we have our emitter inside of our box, our container box, and let's hit play. So it just shoots off particles. So with water simulations, you need to set your emitter, your emissions to hexagonal. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this is, but reading through the manuals for X particles for water simulations, it's hexagonal. So let's do it. So instantly you can see that it's shooting out in all different directions. So the next thing we need to do is we need to tell it to be water. So let's go to our dynamics and let's choose XP fluid effects. Okay. So now we see that it's got kind of a more of a blobby type feel to it, and it's kind of going crazy. So what's happening, the reason why it's going crazy is because it's constantly emitting particles. We don't need that. Let's just set our speed to 0. Excuse me, let me back up. Let's select our emitter. Let's go to emissions. Let's set our speed to 0. Right, so let's take off full lifespan. And no, excuse me, let's take off emit all frames. And we're going to start the emit at 1, and we're going to end the emit at 2. So it's only going to emit for 1 frame. Okay, so there we go. So it's emitting for 1 frame. Great. And now we need to add a gravity effector because water, to act like water, needs gravity. So let's go to Modifier, and let's choose a motion modifier, and let's do an XP gravity. So when we do that, oops, we need to set our boundary object. All right, so the water needs to be able to interact with the boundary object, with the container. So let's go to our container, and let's go to tags, X particles tags, and we're going to set it to an XP collider. Now on this XP collider, we need to tell it to collide on the inside of the normals. So right now the normals are facing outwards. We want them to say, look at the normals that are on the inside. So let's just set this to inside. And let's see what happens. Okay, now they're actually sitting inside of that container and they're moving around. And let's just have this make it look like water. So let's go, if we select our emitter and let's go display, I'd like to set this to squares. And I'd like it to be a gradient. And instantly they set it to a watercolor. And let's say it's based on speed. All right, so now it looks a little bit more like water. So that's cool. So we have water, super basic water, but we have water. So what next? So next we'd like this float, this flamingo to float on it. So let's take our flamingo and let's go tags, X particles tags, and let's put, and this is what's new, let's put an XP dynamics tag on here. So this XP dynamics tag is going to act dynamically with particles. So currently the flamingo is intersecting with our emitter, so we don't want that. So let's move it up a bit so it doesn't intersect. And I know that I don't want, so what this does is basically the distribution distributes based on the object. So right now it's going to say put a particle for every single vertex. Well, this flamingo has a lot of vertices. So if I go display and I show you, it's a very, very dense object. So we don't want that. It's going to go crazy. So let's just go back to here. And we want this to actually be the volume of it. Okay, we want to look at the volume, the inside of it. We don't need every single vertex to interact with it. All right, so let's go to volume. And then let's just see what happens. Let's just hit play and see what happens. Nothing happens. Why did nothing happen? Okay. Okay. It's nothing happened because we were on here. So I had the tag on the null object, but it actually needs to be on the geometry itself. So let's hit play, and you see I hit play, and it's calculating. But what it did is it placed the particle for the volume inside of this object. So quite slow simulation that's happening here. Now, we could cache this and move forward and have our simulation, and it would be great. But the problem I would have with it is that if there's any changes, or if we just want to kind of just be creative with it, or just art direct it a little bit, this is probably too slow of a process for us to actually use. I'm sure it would look great, it'd probably be physically accurate, but it's just not practical for the real world. So a lot of times what will happen is when you have a mesh that is this dense, one of two things. You'll have either a low poly mesh that has very little geometry, a fraction of it, or you can use a container object, which is just a guide for it, and it transfers the motion to the actual final geometry that you're using. So I don't have a low poly mesh for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a container object, because for me, this isn't going to work. This is way too slow. I'm never going to be able to work with this. So let's go and let's build that. So I'm going to switch to a different view, and I'm just going to grab a cube, and I'm going to make this cube roughly the same size as this float. And then let's take this and let's move it in. Doesn't have to be right there, but somewhere kind of close. Okay, so this is going to be our container object. This is actually what we're going to do the simulation on, rather than this highly dense mesh that we have. So I'm just going to delete this tag, and I'm going to apply a tag, an xparticles dynamics tag, to this container cube. Okay, so all we really care about on this is we just care about really just the vertices. Okay, so the vertices and maybe the midpoint, because I say the midpoint because we do actually have, there's geometry in here, so you kind of want the average of what's happening in here. So let's just set it to that, and let's hit play and see what happens. Okay, so it's floating, or it's sinking actually. But that's good though, it's simulating. It's simulating and simulating much, much faster, which is what we want. We want a faster simulation. All right, but it's sinking. So why is it sinking? So this object right now is currently quite heavy. I'm going to go ahead and put a tag on here, and I'm going to make it, where's display tag? And I'm just going to say be a wireframe because I don't want to see that box all the time. So on this cube, right now it's quite dense, so it's a heavy object. So if we select our tag and we go to our emitter properties and we select density, let's put this down to 25. You'll see, let me just turn this tag off. You'll see that now it's actually floating, but it's quite a bit off of the water. Now, why is it off of the water? Okay, it's off of the water or the other particles because right now there's a padding right here. There's an optional padding for radius, which is pretty standard to happen when you're doing dynamic simulation. So let's set this to, let's just say 1. And it goes nuts. And there's a reason why there's padding, and it's because sometimes if you have too much interaction, it goes nuts. So padding is good, and you do need to have it. So let's just set this back to 5 so it doesn't go nuts. And let's turn our visibility back to wireframe. And now what we want to do is we want to have this object tell our float to move with it. So that's as simple as just parenting. I mean, all you have to do for this is put it underneath and parent it. And there is one catch. This needs to be this needs to be an actual meshed object. It can't be a primitive object. So let's go ahead and collapse that down. And then another thing too is make sure that your update PSR is checked. Now I'll show you exactly what that means. But let's just go ahead and play and see if it works. Hey, it works. Okay, so now what we have is we have this cube telling this float how to simulate, how to move, and it's at a fraction of the time. So, but what would happen, back to the PSR thing, if I go to coordinates and we watch our coordinates as they're actually going, you'll see they're changing over here, right? They're changing and they're moving. But if you don't have update PSR checked, it's on by default, so as long as you don't mess with it, it should be fine. But if you don't have it checked, you'll see that nothing is updating. The actual coordinates are just staying the same. So leave it checked. All right, moving on. I'm going to turn this back on and go like this. So this is cool now. So now we have control. Now we can do what we want to do. So we still have the issue of the padding. So what do we do for that? Well, let's just offset the flamingo, right? Let's just move this down so it's offset by that 5% padding. Now, when we look at it, I'm just going to go back to a shading without here. I'm going to switch this shading so it also has a tag because this is quite obnoxious. Okay, that's easier to see. So now you can see that, you know, we have this control. We can actually set it in a little bit too if we want, because I mean, if something's in the water, it's probably going to go down a bit. So now we're getting that nice interactivity that we're looking for, and it's not taking all day to sim. So that's great. So that's the basics of it. So what if we want to make this a little more interesting? What if we want to make this simulation of the water a bit more interesting? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this cube. So we're just seeing the flamingo. And I also want this to go like that. Cool. All right. So one of the easiest things to do if you're trying to create like an ocean is to go and put a wave modifier in there under your dynamic simulation. So if you go to your dynamics and you go to object, dynamics object, and then you go XP wave. Okay, what that's going to do is it's going to do just what it says it is. It's going to make waves. And it gives you like a little visual representation of what it is. You can move it around. It's not that big of a deal. You can also close it down a bit, and it'll be a little bit denser. But for simplistic sake, it makes waves. So let's come over here and let's bump up that strength. And you're going to see that now it's pushing this around, and it's moving it around, and it's interacting kind of like an ocean would, which is pretty awesome and so simple to do. And look how fast our calculations are here, and I'm playing this pretty much real time. So that's cool. So this wave thing is also good, but it's also bad. It's nice to have a visual representation, but at the same time, sometimes you just don't want it. There's a lot of options in here. I'm not going to go over these because that's not really what this lesson's about. But there is options in here that you can play with. You can play with the scale. You can make it larger, smaller, whatever, speed, all that good stuff. I'm not going to mess with that right now. Let's just say this is good, and let's move on. But I do actually want to turn the display off. So let's turn the display to none because I really don't want to see that right now. I actually just want to see what the final output is. So this is cool. This is fine. I'm happy with this. You know, it's a rough day at the beach, we'll say. So that's great. And then next, what you can do is I can come in here and I can still add my modifiers like I normally will with X particles. So I can come in here and I can go MoGraph, not MoGraph, I can go X particles. Let's just do it through here. I can go XP, let's put some turbulence in there. Where are you, turbulence? There we go. All right, so let's just crank it to like 50. It's probably gonna go nuts, but let's just see what happens. All right, so you can see we have turbulence in here now. Obviously too much. This thing is getting swallowed whole, but it's working and it's pretty cool. It's flying around. And then, all right, that's obviously too much. So let's go back to like 25 and let's set this to like curl. Curl usually is pretty nice. Holy shit. Okay, that's too much. All right, let's put this down to 5. Okay, so now we kind of have it like sloshing around a little bit in there. Maybe we could come in and we could say maybe like 10. Let's just see what happens if we go to 10. Yeah, so he's kind of spinning a little bit now. So that's cool. And then, I don't know, I've never tried this other one. Let's see what happens. I'm just curious what would happen if I did a rotator. This is probably going to be nuts, but it could be kind of cool too. Oh yeah, there we go. Vortex. So anyways, you get the idea. You can do cool shit with it, and you can have a lot of fun with it. And it's quite fast. I mean, I'm pretty impressed with this because, I mean, simulations can be a nightmare sometimes, and this is quite fast. And then if you cache it after, then you're golden. So yeah, so that's it. I think this would probably be my second choice to go to if you guys are fortunate to have purchased X Particles. Then I would say if you need simulations, I would 100% go this route before I would go the route of the standard C4D sims, because I just find that this just has so much better control. It just looks cooler. And then, of course, you can add your mesh at the end. You can mesh it out, but that's not really what this is about. That's for another lesson later on. So thank you so much for staying with me on this long series. I hope that's been helpful to you. And if there's any questions, comments, as always, let me know, and I will do my best to answer them. I will see you on the next one.